As you know that in past 3-4 months, world is confronting one of the gravest crises in the form of COVID-19, and all of a sudden it has changed the entire focus or discourse of the world. But then sometimes there are some incidents which comes as the disruption and they have the potential to change the narrative of the history as well. As we all know that God didn't discriminate anyone while giving birth, and by birth all are equal, and it has been taught in every religion. But then even in the 21st century, go anywhere in the world, you will find the hangovers of discrimination in the form of caste, creed and color. Yes, today I am going to talk about the famous George Floyd episode in United States, which has spread all across the globe like a wildfire, and it has created such a situation that even in, as you know, that United States is having highest number of deaths and patients in COVID-19 because of whatever lapses that they know only. But then what went wrong that all of a sudden George Floyd episode came as a massive disruption which has disturbed the entire discourse of the West, entire Europe, entire United States, and even this movement is being raised by many white participants. My dear friends, as you know that slavery is the blot on the face of democratic ethics anywhere in the world. But then if you see the history of United States, right since its birth, way back in 1770s, when the American War of Independence were being waged, till the 1860s when the American Civil War were waged, it was one of the most dominant prevailing practice in the United States. As you know that slaves won't have any freedom and they are treated as the personal property. So it is one of the most heinous crime, if you are thinking in the modern sense, to keep the slaves. But yes, United States of America and most of the European nations kept this practice for a long. You will be astonished to know that when the Fort Sumter was captured by the southern states of America, all of a sudden 7 states left the Confederation only on the ground that Lincoln was asking for some help, and he had the presumption to give a final blow on the practice of slavery, and immediately after these 7 states, another 4 states also left the Confederation. So the American Civil War was one of the gravest crises in the history of America, because from one side it was the question of protecting the Confederation, at the other hand Abraham Lincoln had to keep the promise fulfilled to remove this draconian practice of slavery. Not only that, Lincoln finally overcame and succeeded in maintaining the federal structure as well as removing this draconian act of slavery by the Emancipation Act. Not only that, he was also instrumental in bringing the 13th Amendment of 1865. It was the Civil War which revived the military strength of US Federation, and that was quite crucial during the world wars. As we all know that after the Second World War, the globe entered into a new age of the Cold Wars between the two superpowers, and US emerged as the champion of the democratic principles, the democratic ethics, and most of the international organizations were founded or supported by the United States to showcase it as the global leader. But behind this facelift, there were many things which were not known to the world. And one among them was the racial ghetto which existed predominantly in the southern states of America. Generally, what happens if you see the unjust world order or prevailing injustice, most of us compromise and start leaving it on destiny. Most of us remain silent. We do not bother that if injustice prevails anywhere, it is a threat to justice everywhere. And this was the reason that we will ask, what was wrong with the race and what was wrong with the black people? Actually, these black people were no one, they were the, their ancestors were the African Americans who were none other than the slaves. So still that hangover was there. And these slaves were often, these black people were often not allowed to sit in the hotel. They didn't have the voting rights. Even in the buses, they had to confront the segregation law. They were not allowed to get admission into the schools which were reserved for the whites only. So, just because if you are a born black, a hell lot of things you are going to lose in your life. But then you just imagine what is the fault of a person if he is born to a black family or white family. It is very, very difficult to understand. But then still in the name of religion, caste, creed, color, these kind of ghetto, prevails across the globe and people, silently accept it. Martin Luther King Jr. was not the one who took the life as it came. He was an extraordinary student. Right from the childhood, he was a prodigy child. When he was growing up, actually he was not born to a lower middle class family. Actually, his father was a pastor, which is generally a rich middle class family, you can say. So, and the name itself indicates this Luther, as you know, that the founder of Reformation. So, and his father was also related to the church, Baptist church, that was from the Luther tradition itself. So, this name itself tells a lot about. As you remember in 14th, 15th century, 95 Theses and all, Martin Luther's principle. So, King Martin Luther when confronted these kind of discrimination, he was not ready to accept at the face value. So, a rebel was being shaped in his mind. It was waiting for the boiling point to come. One of the anecdotal incidents I remember, he was just 14-15 year old when he participated in a debate competition, and which was based on the topic of Negro and the Constitution. And in this debate, he criticized the draconian Jim Crow laws, which was the root behind this discrimination imposed upon the blacks. So he was overwhelmed, and mistakenly he sat on the front row of the bus, which was not allowed. According to the segregation law of Montgomery, where he born and sat on the bus, blacks had to take the ticket from the front gate and they had to sit on the back, from the back door and the back roads. And if the crowd is coming, white crowd is there, you have to give up your seat. Thirdly, sometimes for the fun only, if you take the ticket from the front row, gate, and by the time you reach to the back gate, the driver will start the bus for the sake of fun. You can just imagine, how tragic it used to be. Martin Luther remembers that episode. I remind similar kind of thing happened with Gandhi also in South Africa, if I am not wrong. But then actually this young angry man of Martin Luther was not the Indian movie Young Angry Man. Actually he was much inspired with Mahatma Gandhi and Thoreau. Thoreau was the champion against the slavery movement and the practice of civil disobedience in American Civil War. So he was more inclined towards, his answer was non-violent, and he was very clear. Right from the beginning, he had decided that I don't want to become a doctor, I don't want to become an engineer, I just want to serve for the community, the blacks, their emancipation only. I do not know how it is going to happen, but this is my life. This is what I have been for. I have born for. So, I think he topped throughout in his career. Most of the time even he skipped 1 or 2 grades, and then finally PhD in quite early age. And after finishing PhD, he had many opportunities, but deliberately he decided to become a pastor. The reason was very clear. He knew the call of conscience, and that would be the guiding force of his movement, the non-violent movement, which will be based on the ideology of Gandhi and Thoreau. So, all of a sudden, he meets Cassetta in his life, and then they were doing PhD together, and then they got married and decided to settle in Montgomery itself initially. And Martin had joined, actually there was one organization, National Alliance for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. So he joined as the head of Montgomery chapter, and one of the secretary of this organization was Rosa Parks. In 1955, Rosa Parks was very tired that day. She boarded in a bus and she was told by the conductor to give up the seat. She denied vehemently and she got arrested. But this time Martin had become very popular as the pastor. He had the command on a large population. So he decided to take this issue very seriously. He met with the black leaders, with the ministers of the churches, and then it was agreed that there will be an outright boycott of the busage, which will definitely take a great toll on the economy, and government will definitely, it was expected that if you take such move, government will come out with suppressive measures. So even he was arrested, he was penalized with $500 and all. But then he made up his mind, come what may, I am going to dedicate, I am going to change the system. I am not going to accept this segregation law of the bus. He was very focused. And then the very next day, he got a phenomenal response. entire Montgomery side lanes were full by the people. Those who wanted to resume their duties, they were going by walk. Those who wanted to, sometimes even they started helping them by carpooling and all. And the non-violent practices, the wits used by, the convincing wits used by Martin, had a phenomenal impact on this movement. Finally, government had to ban the organization NAACP, and then in response, they started another organization, Montgomery Improvement Agency, right? And the movement was continued, and they had decided to fight a long battle. So even in the governor was against, the local courts were against, they were ready to go to the higher level, and finally the case culminated into the Supreme Court, and it grabbed the attention of the mainstream media, and finally in November 1956 these segregation law were banned by the Supreme Court, Federal Supreme Court. So this was, in the history of 20th century America, this never happened before, because America was a global power and it has enormous power to suppress any mass movement anywhere in the world, even in Cuba or anywhere, any part of Vietnam, anywhere in the world. But then back home, everyone was taken as a surprise. And see, US had a very good trick. If it wanted to trap you, they would have blamed the level of communist or something like that, supported by the communist. So ghost of communist were often used, or you can say misused in the political coterie. And this Martin Luther was a wonderful leader. He knew all these things, and that is why every move was deliberate. First, suppose if some problem coming in, okay, he tried to know and record it in such a manner that the narrative looks a very realistic narrative, just what Gandhi did in Champaran, writing the stories of the farmers or something like that. So
I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when it happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon during the part of conversation.
This is how, and then he decided, Southern Christian Leaders Conference was formed very next year, right? And he became the president of that organization. And now you see, there was no looking back for Martin. Martin had decided that this is going to be continued, and then there is no looking back. Actually, there was one case, in Supreme Court, Brown versus the Educational Group, and in that case in 1954, Supreme Court had provided that there could not be any segregation between the black and the white people, especially in terms of education. But even in 1957, when 9 blacks got admitted in a Little Rock school, you will be shocked to know President Eisenhower had to send military, and that military used to engage with those blacks 24/7 to protect them. That kind of opposition was made. And just for the sake of integrated, kind of, education where blacks and white could, study together. And Martin knew all these things. That is why he came to India deliberately to learn the Gandhian practices. And he was highly inspired of the Gandhian practices, and that he confesses also in his biography that largely, inspired him to do whatever he was doing. But this was not the end of the story. From 1955 till the last breath, when he took in 1968, when President Johnson declared that the Civil Rights Bill, and by the bill all kind of discrimination were removed from America, even then he had prophesied, Martin Luther had prophesied, in terms of employment, in terms of poverty, in terms of health issue, in terms of housing, we are far behind the whites, and these issues are continuing to, going to continue in the future as well. And even today, when you see 2018-19, when 50 years happened of his death, 4th of April 1968, so his prophecy was, becoming true. We could not keep our promises up that black and white both are equal. And that is why this George Floyd episode has reinstated the discourse of this discrimination, this ghetto of the black in the center stage. Thank you very much for voting this. Thank you.